Welcome to Why We Talk, Orange Chair Series. I'm Dr. LaRonda McGross, CEO at YWCA Central Alabama. Join us each episode as we engage in conversation with thought leaders and influencers working to break down barriers and build bridges to create systems change. So please pull up a chair and join us. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am Dr. LaRonda McGross, CEO of YWCA Central Alabama, and I am so pleased that you all have decided to join us today on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Here we are, and today's discussion was made possible by Vulcan Materials, a longtime friend of the YW, and we are so grateful for their support of our Why We Talk Orange Chair series. May the 17th marked the 67th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, the landmark U.S. Supreme Court case that declared racial segregation in public schools to be unconstitutional. Today, we'll discuss a little bit about the case, as well as to examine history of educational disparities and to determine whether or not the ongoing pandemic could widen academic gaps for Black, Brown, and children living in poverty. I am so excited to introduce our esteemed panelists today. And to reserve some time, you can read their biographies online at ywcabham.org. I will go ahead and introduce them to you. We have a few who may pop on in a second here, but right now I have Dr. Marquita Davis, who's the Deputy Director of Early Learning at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a former YWCA board member. Welcome, Marquita Davis. Dr. Davis. Dr. Jayne Dawson, who is the Academic Officer for Birmingham City Schools. Welcome, Dr. Dawson. Appreciate you for being here. And also we have Jayne Williams, who is the General Counsel and Director of Legal Advocacy for the Alabama Association of School Boards. Thank you so much for being here, Jayne. And to all of you, I think we have a couple more people who may join us. But we'll go ahead and just jump in. Jayne, really the first question is to you. And would you mind just giving us sort of a brief history lesson here on Brown versus Board of Education and its impact on racial disparities in public education across the nation and really here in Alabama?
I will, and thank you for letting me be here with you all today. I had to go back to my law school days to get the background on Brown versus Board, but I will talk to y'all about that a little bit. So let me set the stage for you, and I will be brief, but I'm going to set the stage for you. In the late 1800s, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Black people could be forced to use separate public facilities like water fountains, schools, and bathrooms, and that was Plessy versus Ferguson. That's where this whole concept of separate but equal started, and it would be the law of the land for nearly 60 years. So it should not be a shock to anyone that separate but equal was a joke. If the government believes that I'm not fit to drink the same water as you, what's the likelihood that my local school board is going to give me the same access to good teachers and administrators or facilities or other resources? So it was frankly illogical, in my opinion, to expect any other outcome. And that's precisely what happened. It wasn't that white people were smarter, so we needed to go to school with them. It was that they were provided more opportunity and more resources, so we had to go to school with them. So fast forward 50 years to 1951. The NAACP was focused on filing lawsuits to challenge the Jim Crow era laws all over the country, particularly as it related to school segregation. Little Linda Brown, was a 9-year-old living in Topeka, Kansas. Her dad wanted her to go to the Sumner Elementary School, and she and other Black children were denied enrollment there. So her dad decided to join with some other parents to sue the local Board of Education on the grounds that Black schools were not equal to the white schools, and therefore they violated the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And by the way, the lead counsel representing them was a young lawyer in his early 40s named Thurgood Marshall. So by the time the case kind of worked its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices were reportedly split on the decision until Chief Justice Fred Vinson died of a sudden heart attack and was replaced by Chief Justice Earl Warren. Warren was able to shift the debate among the justices that then led to a unanimous ruling which overturned Plessy and the separate but equal doctrine in public facilities across the country, which included schools. That was 67 years ago on Monday, as Dr. McGrath said. So for perspective, my parents, who are now in their early 70s, went to segregated schools here in Alabama. So while some states pretty quickly moved towards desegregation, the most immediate impact of Brown versus Board of Education was that some southern states in particular resisted it so aggressively that it ended up sparking the Montgomery bus boycott and the civil rights movement just 1 year later. You all know that we had the Little Rock Nine who got blocked from Central High School by the Arkansas National Guard. That was in 57. George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door to block 3 Black college students from the University of Alabama. That was as late as 63. We saw desegregation cases opened all over Alabama and even all over the country, which essentially forced local school districts to adhere to practices that encouraged continued desegregation under the supervision, of course, of the federal court. Most of us have heard of Lee v. Macon around Alabama. That was filed by a young attorney named Fred Gray in 1963 after 14 Black students were blocked from enrolling in what was the all-white Tuskegee High School. It was Lee v. Macon, which ultimately led to desegregation of schools in Alabama. And that was 15 years after the Supreme Court ruled in Brown. I was born in 74, right here in Montgomery. I attended public schools that were, for the most part, largely white schools. The reason I could do that and therefore get, frankly, what was an excellent public school education as my white friends was because of the work that was started back before Brown and then Lee v. Macon. But since then, we have seen this slow but systematic resegregation of our schools across the country. The causes are as simple as they are complicated. We don't have laws that say my 2 sons can't go to schools with their white peers. It's not that explicit anymore. Some would argue that there's a different strategy through programs, perhaps like vouchers or cuts in education funding that don't explicitly promote segregation, but they have the same ultimate impact of segregation. And of course, the white flight that we've seen in our neighborhoods is just as explicit as the white flight that's in our schools, whether it's accomplished by moving to less diverse, more homogeneous neighborhoods and cities, or moving to more expensive, more exclusive private schools, the result's the same. Every year, our State Department of Education collects all kinds of data, and that includes tracking the racial makeup of local schools in Alabama. And what you'll find right here is a surprising number of schools that are 98 and 99% white in a state where a third of our students are Black, or 98 and 99% Black in a state where more than half the students are white. So as diverse as our state is, you do not see that reflected in some of our school populations. So as a result, my 2 boys are less likely to attend a racially diverse school than I was in the 80s and 90s. And so we are now upside down in our desegregation efforts in Alabama.
I told you she was going to get our history lesson in this afternoon. And I mean, I just love what you were saying around it's not as explicit, right? It is about, the programs and things that are not, maybe lack of access for students as well. Welcome, Dr. Sibley. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I apologize for the technical difficulty there, but I am on board now and I was listening along. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, so happy to have you. Dr. Sibley is the Director of Communications for the Alabama Department of Education, and we so welcome you, sir, today to this conversation. Here at the YWCA, we know the importance of quality early learning to the success of children living in poverty and for children of color. Our Child Development Center has been in operation for over 35 years, serving homeless and low-income working families. We know that pre-K prepares kids for big school, and that children with a high quality pre-K program are more likely to graduate high school. And you know who else understands this is Dr. Marquita Davis. So, if you could just talk to us, Dr. Davis, tell us how the Gates Foundation focuses on early learning and helps to tackle social economic disparities in education.
Thank you so much. It is, it's great to be back in Birmingham virtually, even though I'm in the DMV, the DC area. And it's also great that I said this to you earlier, that my homegirl is shepherding the YW and leading it fabulously. So I'm super excited. And my homegirl means we're both from Illinois. She's from the city, which we call Chicago the city. So for all you New Yorkers, I'm sorry. Chicago is the city. And so it's great to be back. As you said, the YW is really unique in that it provides services for homeless children in a quality early learning setting, one of the only that I know of early childhood settings where their homeless childcare program is actually nationally accredited. And so through that lens, the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, where I am so lucky to work, has a strategy focused on pre-K, the pre-K years in both Head Start and also what we would call state-funded pre-K, which is inclusive of not only Head Start, but also childcare in public pre-K that are actually housed in public schools. And so the work of the foundation centers equity. We are specifically interested in outcomes for kids of color and those children experiencing poverty. We talk about it a bit differently. We don't say low income, we say the kids that are experiencing poverty. And we want to call that out explicitly. We are focused on Black children and Latino children and children experiencing poverty. And we are focused on this pre-K space around three essential elements. One is around the ideal of assessments, assessments that are in classrooms that show the teacher-child interaction, and also summative assessments that are based on the developmental gains of kids at the end of the programmatic year in the 5 areas of domains for learning for young children. And more importantly, we are focused on these particular solutions because we want to be able to have quality data inputs. But to have quality data inputs, you need quality data systems and an infrastructure to support them. And so we're also interested in establishing these data systems for early learning. So we have the solutions and the data to help inform program improvement, and also to talk about, help to also inform what's happening in these pre-K programs where states and federal governments invest millions and millions of dollars. And then finally, we are deeply interested in what we call coherent instructional systems. And that's inclusive of curricula, professional development for teachers, and also formative assessments. And we are honing in on this notion around what does quality look like in a curricula for young children. And so we are on a learning path for curricula. We don't think we have all the answers. We want to center it in equity and understanding, the cultural responsiveness of early learning, and we're calling out the populations that are important for us to know more about. So that is the work of the foundation.
That is so great. And thank you for really helping us around language. Language is so important, and how you say things matters. And children experiencing poverty is a way of not branding children as somehow being flawed, right? And so I love that.
Yeah, because we often talk about children in a deficit instead of the asset frame. And so low income, and children who live in poverty are experiencing more than just income.
Yes,
it's all of those things. So
thank
you for acknowledging that.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure, did Kimberly join us, you all? Let me know if she's here. But this is a question for Dr. Dawson and Dr. Sibley and Kimberly, if she is here. First of all, how does your school or school system or organization address educational disparities? And I know that that's a big, big question there. But if you can just talk a little bit about what you are doing to address some of those disparities. And I'll start with you, Dr. Dawson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. We're so honored to be here to represent Birmingham City Schools. I want to first recognize my colleague on this panel for addressing that wording around the deficit mindset. It is so critical that we address that, and that's exactly what we are trying to do and are doing in Birmingham City Schools to close this divide, if you will. One of the things, there are three big areas that we decide to hone in on. Number one, we decide to provide access to technology and internet for all of our students, not just some districts started with third grade and up. We wanted to, our superintendent, Dr. Mark Sullivan, our school board, and our district decided to make sure that all of our students had access to a device. So all of our students pre-K through 12th grade have a device. Second to that, we also provided hotspots for all of our students where parents let us know that they were not able to have access to the internet. So they had a device, but what good is the device if you still can't get on the internet to connect with your teacher? So we closed that gap by providing hotspots. And on those hotspots, if there are other siblings that are in the home with those students, they had access to up to 6 other devices on that one hotspot. So we closed the gap in that way. Second to that is very critical for us is in the area of reading. We know with the Alabama Literacy Act, it is so important, especially at the lower grades, that our students have the resources in order to build that foundational literacy. And so for us, when especially in the midst of a pandemic, it's so critical for our kids to be in front of a teacher so that the teacher can be modeling those graphemes and those phonemes so they can see how to make those sounds, to make the blends, to make words, to ultimately get to the level of comprehension. So having the technology where students can log on, we remove the barriers so that our lower grade students particularly can be able to still learn with those foundational skills as they are learning to read, so that as they matriculate, they will be able to read to learn. And then the third component we realized that was so very important for us as we close this gap with the technology is to make sure that we put books in front of our students. We know that as we talk about reading, reading doesn't happen by osmosis. It happens, you learn to read by reading. And so we provided all of our students in elementary schools in particular, all them reading books kits. And we also provided resources for our parents to work with those students to unpack those texts, to ask those right type of STEM questions, to be able to spark that reading and give them resources and skills and tools to help them when they're at the grocery store, to be able to identify certain words, to make meaning of those words. And then the last piece around that is really around helping our teachers to have this paradigm shift in how they're going to teach in the middle of a pandemic. So we recognize that our teachers needed this work. And so from the month of August of 2020 up until last month in April 21, we provided over 350 different professional learning opportunities for our teachers, ranging from how to teach in a remote blended and learning environment, how to engage parents in the midst of this pandemic, how to use technology in a way that will engage our students, from curriculum and instructional strategies, special education and our EL population supports, to small group instruction to close those gaps for students who already have some learning loss, or what I like to call unfinished learning, and then how to effectively grade students in a pandemic where they can still experience success in this transition. And then most importantly, added to that as a through line is the social emotional learning piece. So these are the things that we are doing in Birmingham City Schools under the leadership of our superintendent, Dr. Sullivan, and our school board to address this learning loss.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson. I love the fact that you are working with students in the read to learn to read ways, as well as the teachers, because it cannot be easy, and we know,
Absolutely.
to teach in a blended model. And so thank you so much for the work that you are doing in Birmingham City Schools.
Absolutely.
Dr. Sibley, what about you in terms of addressing educational disparities?
Good afternoon to everyone, and I thank everyone for being here. I'm proud to be on this panel. I'm in very good company. A lot of my colleagues and people that I know after Dr. Dawson's exemplary explanation as to what they're doing in Birmingham, we could all hang up right now, right? That's pretty much it. He did a fantastic job. Again, thank you for having me, and thank you for giving the State Department of Education an opportunity to weigh in on this very important subject. When we talk about disparities, we all know that there's nothing new about disparities between races in the state of Alabama and really in the nation as a whole. But we do the best that we can to shore up those differences and make sure that we provide equitable opportunities and equitable services for students so that they'll have a good quality education. And how the State Department of Education weighs in on that is very numerous ways, and it is really from the cradle to the grave. There are various areas. There's obviously education. Our goal is to make sure that all students receive a fair and appropriate public education and the best quality education possible. But in order to do that, it envelops so many other areas. You know, I didn't think honestly too much until the pandemic hit about the impact that child nutrition has on a household when they're not in school every day. My father always said, you can't learn anything if you're sleepy, and you can't learn anything if you're hungry. And making sure that students have adequate food supply is a part of what we do here at the Department of Education, making sure that we have opportunities for students to learn and paying particular attention to those who need that extra attention the most. We have various federal and state guidelines that we have to adhere to, but we look at data and we make sure that we address those who are struggling the most. And as Dr. Dawson mentioned, he talked about reading earlier. We all recognize reading as the cornerstone to all other learning. And with the political winds that are amongst us right now, of course, reading is, as it has always been, it's crucial. And again, it's important to all the other subjects. So we are making sure that parents and students have opportunities to beef up on their comprehension. I want to take a moment of liberty right now to talk about the summertime instruction. We have summer coming up. You may have heard a lot about it this week. A lot of people have been calling it the fifth quarter, sort of liking it to a football game, whereas we're in overtime at this point. We don't want to take this summer of all summers. Of course, some relaxation is due to everyone after the year we've had, but we really want to encourage parents and teachers alike to put kids in an environment where they can learn and get themselves more acclimated to where they're going to be in the fall. We know that there's nothing that matches or that can really compare to an in-person teacher. But every time I say that, I take the opportunity to give credit to the teachers in the state of Alabama who did a yeoman's job at a moment's notice to turn everything around in their world and to teach virtually in an environment where most teachers had not had an experience in that, nor were they planning to do it. On Friday the 13th, March 13th of 2020, ironically, it's Friday the 13th, that was the day that we closed schools down. And that was the day that life as we knew it changed for a lot of us. So our teachers and our administrators as well did a fantastic job adjusting as best they could, but nothing compares to in-person instruction. So making sure whenever possible this summer, students are in front of a teacher or trying to get some type of particularly literacy skills. We can go on the State Department of Education's website at alsde.edu and find links to anything that's happening in your area over the summer. We have a list of actual physical summer camps that students can, that young people can go to and that their parents can involve them in. We also have various online links where people can, from the comfort of their own home, since we're all so accustomed to meeting virtually and doing things online nowadays, there are a host of resources that we have available online where students can go on, practice their reading, any grade level, K through 12. There's something there that they can download and read. Thousands of books. We're providing camp at schools all across the summer. Obviously, COVID has had its negative impact, but if there's a silver lining to it, it is that we have resources like never before. So schools are in a position where they can provide resources for students over the summer. They're sending books home with students over the summer and providing a lot of opportunities. So everything from education to child nutrition to making sure that our students get to and fro appropriately. And I'll end this part with saying the importance of mental health. We all think about what happened with the crisis, and we know that there was an educational loss. We know that there were child nutrition issues, and that was one of the things that we really got innovative about and tried to find ways to make sure that we got kids fed. But one of the things that I think is crucial is the mental health and the mental support. And we're doing a lot in terms of getting money from the legislature, petitioning to have additional mental health service coordinators out in the field. We have over 100 across the state now, one in every school system, because there are some very serious mental health issues that need to be addressed along with everything else as a result of the pandemic.
You are absolutely right. And food insecurity is real. And we know our kids, this is where many of our kids receive their meals for the day. So thank you so much for all the work that you are doing. And I do want to welcome Kimberly to the conversation today. Hello. We got you on here?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And am I pronouncing your name right?
It's Kimbrell.
Thank you, Kimbrell. Thank you. Kimbrell is the president of the National Association of Elementary School Principals and longtime principal of Cordova Elementary School in Tennessee. Thank you so much for being here. We were just discussing educational disparities and really what you are doing to address those. So want to have you chime in here real quick and just tell us a little bit about what you're doing to address those educational disparities at this time during the pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, I would like to say thank you for sharing so much about what's happening in the state of Alabama. It's great to see that a lot of things that are happening in our state, and then also that NESP is supporting principals in, is well aligned with student needs and also best practices. As president of NESP, I'd just like to share that NESP is here to support every school leader in meeting the needs of individual students. And we know that each of our school systems are completely different. My school system is very similar to Birmingham school system or Montgomery school system. We have a great deal of poverty and a great deal of diversity in our school system. I'm in Shelby County Schools, which is the 25th largest school district in the country, and very proud of the work that our superintendent is doing, Dr. Ray, in partnering with the state. Our state has done a tremendous amount of work. Our governor is pretty serious about in-person learning. But I want to say that as we were in a virtual setting until March, and then 2/3 of our students are still in a virtual setting, that our teachers in our district have gone above and beyond to try to bridge that inequity that is often there with a digital platform. And so we are now a one-to-one district, and our state, the state of Tennessee, has extended extraordinary efforts to bridge the K-2 divide when you talk about early learning and those students who didn't get to start kindergarten and didn't get to start pre-K. We don't have universal pre-K, but there is a great push for districts to have applied for a grant that was available for early learning, and so our district was very fortunate to receive that. With NESP, we've had a COVID task force that gathered resources and did informational sessions for principals starting last spring to help meet those needs. And our principals really, really were able to take a part in that. We also have a race and equity task force. As we all know, we were hit with social injustice at the same time that we were hit with the pandemic. And so we are trying to talk about those divides that are brought to light a little bit more with this pandemic, and looking at our implicit bias and how to change that from the standpoint of our individual schools and school systems.
Thank you so much. And I was just writing this implicit bias because the YW is a social justice organization. That's what we live and breathe, and we're always talking about it here. And do you think, and this is a general question to anyone who wants to kind of chime in here, but do you think that we really have some children who have just fallen through the cracks? Like, are they really going to be able to catch up? And there's some controversy around whether or not that is a pandemic learning loss is really a thing. So really, do you think that they have fallen through the cracks?
Oh, if I can jump in, I'll jump in
Please.
just a little bit here.
Thank you.
I am not a classroom teacher right now, although I have had plenty of conversations since we knew we were going to have this conversation with other people in the building, and I've garnered thoughts of different people. And the answer that applies to any question, it depends. For many kids, they may have been able to endure this last school year with the support of their parents and their online and virtual experiences. They may have some ill effect of the circumstance, but will get right back on pace and do fine. But I do think that we are fooling ourselves if we think that there's not going to be some long lasting impact for a significant number of students. You have to take into consideration there were a lot of students across the state through no fault of their own who did not have broadband service, who did not have devices. Now, the state as a whole has spent over $100 million in terms of trying to supply devices, trying to get broadband availability in the most rural areas of the state. But that took time. So for some students, they weren't in school at all for several months. They were, and think about this consideration. Ordinarily, if a parent has a child at home and they can't go to school or what have you, have grandma, or grandpa, or auntie or somebody. But because of the circumstances surrounding COVID-19, a lot of people, young people, couldn't be in the presence of their grandparents or their other elderly relatives like they would ordinarily. So they didn't receive, even if not formal instruction, sort of the natural education that you get just being around adults, listening to how they speak, what they do, that kind of thing. So it was sort of a double whammy in a lot of cases. So I think that there will be those who bounce back relatively unscathed, but there are a significant number, and we don't really have data right now that shows the overall impact of COVID that will show in the coming years. That some data is coming in, but that we don't have just holistic data about exactly how the impact affected everyone, how the COVID crisis affected everyone academically. But we do know that there was a hit, and we expect to be dealing with that for the foreseeable future in certain cases.
Dr. Sibley, Jayne said that answer was a lawyer's answer. It depends.
Exactly.
Can I jump in after Dr. Sibley?
Yes, Dr. Johnson.
Yes. So my answer to that would be yes to the fact of unfinished learning, and but the hope in all of this is that the students can, as my good brother has stated, that they are resilient and they will rise again. But it's important for us as educators that we do a number of things. First of all, it's important that even though our students may have experienced some learning loss, that teachers continue to keep providing materials for students at the grade level that they are going to. Not trying to spend time in a deficit mindset, as my good sister said earlier. That's the point that I was trying to get to, because a lot of teachers, if we're not careful, the first thing that they would love to do is to start remediating. And if we stay in the land of remediation, then we never expose the students to the grade level standards or exposure to the text or the materials at the grade level that they are on. So our goal in Birmingham City Schools to address this, to ensure that we minimize and eradicate this deficit mindset, and to ensure that all teachers are teaching grade level standards and in small groups or in after school programs or in Saturday schools where we will work on continuing to close those gaps. Now, we can still do that in the classroom through what we call in education tier 1 or tier 2 instruction. But the other ways that we're going to do that in Birmingham is through our summer camps, our summer programs. We are closing the gap through our Alabama Literacy App camps. We're closing the gaps for our students who miss those skills. We're going to have a step-up program. We're in our intercessions. We built, our superintendent and the school board has built in an intercession throughout the school year for these week-long times for students who may have some gaps. And that will be our time to have the step-up program for our students who missed kindergarten to come in and get those remediation skills so that they can continue to advance and matriculate with their students. And so these are the ways, and I believe that if we do this by exposing students to grade level standards and we scaffold that instruction in a way that students can see the skills, that the prerequisite skills, but make it applicable to the grade level standards that they're working on. And if we stay away from a deficit mindset, I believe that we can close the gaps over time. It's like a marathon. It's not going to happen. Some kids will get across that finish line early. Some will take a little longer. But the goal in education is that we get every child across that finish line.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We have several comments I want to make sure to get those and questions in the chat. We have one here that says, what are the plans to support third grade students that will be impacted by the 2022 required testing of the Alabama Literacy Act? So what are the plans to support third grade students that will be impacted by it? Who's good on that one?
I'll jump in there a little bit, and I don't want to hog the mic. So if anyone else wants to jump in, please tell me to be quiet, and I'll jump right in. It's important to know one of the things that we're doing. We asked for, and the Alabama legislature provided us with $18 million for summer camp this summer. We've identified our schools that are have the lowest percentage of proficiency and within the state, and we are giving 70 hours of intensive literacy instruction to students throughout the summertime. And it's more than just handing them a book or doing something. It has to be focused, intensive instruction. And we are providing that for a number of students throughout the summer. That's just one of the things. To the point that Dr. Dawson made earlier, it's the students, but it's also the teachers. And a lot of what we're doing is making sure that we provide teachers with the professional development and the training necessary to give the students the kind of instruction that they need. As a state, we spent $9 million in letters training, and letters is the science of reading professional development that teachers have an opportunity to obtain so that they can become more effective reading coaches and reading teachers, as well as having people leave from the department to go out into the field. So in every school system there is a reading teacher or a literacy teacher in the school, but there's also someone that comes to provide support to them from the State Department as well. These are just some of the things that we're doing to make sure that students are catching up and that they don't get caught, if you will, in that third grade thing. But here's the thing. It's an important point to make when it comes to the Literacy Act, I think. It's important to realize that it's not a gotcha that get students when they get to the end of the third grade, one big test, and if you take it, you get cut back, and if you don't, you don't. This whole thing comes along with resources and supplies from kindergarten up through the third grade that in an ideal situation would make it so that you're not so much worried about being retained when you get to the end of the third grade. So while that is a real issue in a lot of cases, what we have to also do is focus not so much on the retention aspect of it, although that is a real thing, but pay attention to, from K going up to 3, all of the resources that are available for schools, for teachers, for parents, for the students themselves. These are little kids, so we're not without parent support, but all the resources that are available so that we can get ourselves accustomed to reading on grade level, having an adequate amount of comprehension before we get to the point where we're at the end of the third grade and have to wonder whether or not we're going to proceed forward.
And to add to that real quick, I promise I'll be very quick.
Sure.
In the city of Birmingham, to Dr. Sibley's point, we have the programs that he's mentioning in every last one of our elementary schools and K-8 schools, the Alabama Literacy Act camps for all of our students. We also are partnering with a lot of our community partners who are supporting us with high dosage tutorial programs to support students. That has been going on all year, and it will be ramped up throughout the summer and also throughout the school year. You can go to our website at bhamcityschools.org and go, and right there on the website, you can see all of our summer school offerings. There are a plethora, about 60 to 7 programs, and also about 14 to 15 of our partners who are supporting us in this effort to do exactly what Dr. Sibley is talking about.
Thank you so much. There are a lot of great resources being put in the chat. So please go in there and grab them. Everything from, we're looking for some teachers, teacher salaries and things. I think we are, let me see, some other summer school sort of
Rhonda,
resources. Yes, please.
before we jump off of Literacy Act, I just want to remind everyone that there was a bill passed to delay implementation of the Literacy Act, I believe, for 3 years. And as of this morning, we still don't know if the governor is going to sign that or not. There is some fierce lobbying and battling going on about whether or not she vetoes that or goes ahead and signs it. So we're still waiting for some breaking news on the status of the Literacy Act and whether or not it's going to be implemented fully the next year.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Jayne. All right. Teachers we know have been on the front lines and really doing a great job every day, but certainly during the pandemic. And so I'm curious about any success stories or wonderful stories, that you have heard about teachers and just some of the great work that's being done by them, maybe creativity or anything of that nature that you would like to share with us. And I'm sure everyone has something to say about this, but I see Kimberly, Kimbrell, your head shaking. What do you think? You have any? Some nodding there.
Yeah, I'd like to say that teachers are the real heroes in our schools during this pandemic. I would go all the way back to March when, as Dr. Sibley mentioned, we shut our doors and we really didn't have a lot of notice. Our teachers had immediately had to begin online instruction in a way that they hadn't done before and learning new resources. Our teachers do a lot of home visits, social distance home visits, taking resources to students or just checking in on students. They also have been very creative in the ways to communicate with parents and with students. And I'm finding that oftentimes we are getting even more parental involvement virtually when we have those virtual parent meetings than we would have even been given the opportunity in the past, because our parents are working parents, and of course they're getting to join in a way that they hadn't before. And so teachers are the spearheads of that. We provide the avenues, we set the goals, we continue with focusing on our mission. And I know that it is exhausting. It is exhausting because our teachers are teaching dual virtual and in person at the same time. But they don't let it get them too discouraged. When students are having difficulty maintaining that virtual platform, they reach out and talk with parents. They do tutorials. They do home visits. They are doing things that are creative with drive-through sessions, where parents and students can come drive by the school, whether those are just social building exercises, because our students are really needing some more social emotional support, whether those are Saturday opportunities. They are really stretching their creativity to be there for our students.
I am going to jump in because it's like double Dutch, but I want to acknowledge Kimbrell and the wonderful state of Tennessee, where the Gates Foundation actually invested with the State Department there in early learning and establishing elements of quality. And then Shelby County, which has one of the best Head Start programs in the country there, that is also part of the public school system and does a lot of good things for young children. So welcome to the conversation, and the perspective of Tennessee, I think, is an important one to add to Alabama. Mine is a bit different because I'm speaking from the space of early learning. And so when we talk about teachers of young children, these teachers of young children are teaching in what we call a mixed delivery system. They are childcare, Head Start, public school teachers. And if you ever talk about just the teachers of young children, if we didn't learn anything else during COVID, parents learned that they don't know what to do with a 4-year-old. They have no idea what to do with a 3 and 4. You mean I have to actually keep this child entertained and teach them all at the same time? And so we have, there's now this great appreciation of all teachers, but especially teachers of young children, and the difficulties that they have to encounter in teaching young children remotely. It isn't designed developmentally to be a remote experience of young children. So I think that not only did teachers suffer in this space, so did young kids. They suffered because developmentally, we always talk about screen time, and children experiencing poverty are always exposed to screen time. They're always looking at handheld devices. But the flip side of that is that the early learning space wasn't ready in any way for this remote learning experience, and had to scramble to try to figure out how you do something developmentally appropriate on a screen with a 4-year-old who has the attention span of a 4-year-old. And so teachers in this space had to be very creative while at the same time taking care of their own children, because we know in early learning that the wages of teachers of early learning are often not on par with teachers in public schools. Now, Alabama is a bit different because they have the nationally recognized pre-K program, which pays teachers on par with public schools, and it is a mixed delivery system. But teachers of young children have really worked very hard during the pandemic to engage parents, to help parents understand activities that are appropriate for young kids, to create screen experiences to the best of their ability that allows children to move in their environments, story time, the things that we take for granted or the things that we don't know exist in the early learning experience, we now know. And so the last thing that I want to say, I'm kind of jumping all over because I try to be quiet and only show up where I had something to actually add to the conversation, is this this is a challenge for the early learning field around digital native children and our ability to make adjustments for early learning experiences for those children who only know the world in this digital way. If we don't figure out how to infuse some type of appropriate technology into the way in which kids learn, either in the classroom site or with parents as support, someone else will write that story for us. And so it is a challenge for us, and something that we are thinking about at the Gates Foundation, how you infuse not only what's appropriate in a classroom learning environment, but what will be best for kids as generations on. And then the last thing is this whole notion around the gaps that exist, or as my colleague said, the unfinished learning, these opportunity spaces. We will not be able to figure out what's best for kids if we don't have appropriate data. And that, data isn't sexy. It doesn't sound great like a summer program or or we're going to have hopscotch and blueberry muffins. But you have to have data to inform how you engage both teachers and administrators. And so there has to be a space for collecting data from instruments that do no harm to children, that are not made for accountability purposes. So in this space, this opportunity, I recognize that public schools have these accountability assessments that they will be giving kids in 3rd grade. But there's also an opportunity to use the kindergarten readiness assessment, or a version of it, in kindergarten and 1st grade, to understand the benchmarks of where kids are and the losses and the gains, just to use that as informative for teachers in that space for learning. So that's what I would say.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for not forgetting the early learning teachers. We have, as I said, a center here as well. And it's been tough. It was really tough for our teachers who are really used, and our kids who are used to seeing them smile, and they had to wear a mask. And there's just so much around social emotional support that was tough. Jayne, you want to jump in here?
I did, and I'll tell y'all, my plan was to kind of sit back and relax until a legal question came up and let all y'all educators handle the bulk of this work. But I felt called to say something about how great our teachers are given the opportunity. I think we've gone through this, destructive and devastating pandemic, and we've lost people and everything's been so terrible. But I think also we have really learned some lessons about ourselves and about what's important and all that. And one of those things I hope that we all now see is how important our teachers are. Because as Dr. Davis said, I'm a mom of 2 boys. I am very aggressively not a teacher. And this year I learned why. Because I can't do that. But I hope that as we all kind of started pretending, that us parents started pretending to teach our children in this virtual world, that we realize just how important they are. When the Zoom stops working and all the 3rd graders panic about, oh my gosh, I can't get online. I just saw an incredible amount of grace from our teachers. And I hope they received grace, because this was not easy for them, especially when we went hybrid. And teachers were simultaneously managing some online platform and still had 8, 9, 10 mask faces in their room and trying to juggle all that. And so every opportunity I get from now until the Lord calls me home, I'm going to say how much I love teachers, because this year they just showed out on us. And it was a beautiful thing to see under the worst possible circumstances. And I cannot say it enough. Thank you.
And I cannot let this close without thanking the wonderful teachers of Birmingham City Schools. Cannot let that happen. They, to what my panelists, colleagues have stated, have been resilient in the midst of this, from remote to going to blended to simultaneously teaching, for coming in and providing pre-vaccination, coming into the buildings and working with students on high stakes assessments that had to be administered. So on behalf of our superintendent, Dr. Sullivan, our board, we want to thank all of the Birmingham City school teachers for their sacrifice to ensure, from sacrificing finances, from time to visiting kids, to making sure they were taken care of, to ensure that every child in their classroom was reached and was engaged in the learning process to the best that they could. Just thank you on behalf of our superintendent for all of the teachers in Birmingham City Schools. They rock.
Yeah, we could not do it without them. Good Lord. There is a question in the chat. What plans are in place to address the large number of Alabama students who did not return at all from the pandemic, specifically the nearly 5,000 kindergartners who never showed up? Who do we want to have?
I'll give a shot at that a little bit.
Okay.
Those are fluid numbers. We're still trying to find out what is what with that. But it is the case that there were a significant number, and I've heard that 5,000 number in there as well. A good number of students who, the majority of which were kindergarten students, who didn't show up. But do keep in mind the fact that kindergarten has not previously been mandatory in the state of Alabama. That's an optional thing as to whether or not you want to send your children to kindergarten or not. Here is where that comes into play. In a year like we've had over the past year with the pandemic and everything, it's understandable why people would want to keep their children home. But did they keep their children home and get them ready for the first grade? Because if you kept your child home from kindergarten, like you have the option to do, without any kind of instruction, when you get to the first grade and you join school next year, everyone's not going to be on the same level. One of the things that we did here at the State Department of Education was to ask the legislature to give us level funding from the year before. Schools are funded by their students from a year in arrears. And if we have, if this year there were fewer students and we were funded by the students from last year, there would have been less money at a year when we needed more money, more support. We have certain funds that have come in from the federal government, of course, and they're help for everything from infrastructure to supplies to professional development to transportation to nutrition and everything else. But we, at the same time, have to make sure that we're doing all that we can to use the time that we have wisely and use the money that we have wisely. It doesn't last, forever. And that's one thing to be mindful of. So school administrators are doing what they can to get the best bang for their buck for the longer period of time. But in terms of preparing students, the third grade students in particular, again, it's those resources that we were talking about earlier. that have been available, because the Alabama Literacy Act was pre-COVID. All of these resources, this money, the money that's been set aside, all of that was the case before COVID. And I encourage anyone, if they're really concerned about how that could work out, because I understand on the surface, it looks a certain kind of way. When I first saw that law, it worried me a lot. And there are still things that we have to be mindful of, because we have to be mindful of things that are going to impact our children the most. But the state of Mississippi did something similar about 5 or 6 years ago. And the outcome from that was by and large good. It looked to be good. The test scores went up. There was not that much retention, nowhere near what people thought it was going to be. People actually used the resources that were available to them, and reading comprehension improved in the state. So we're hoping that they didn't have to deal with the crisis of COVID back 3 or 4 years ago. We just implemented this at a time, and it hit at a time where it was very inconvenient. But I'm hoping that we will continue to assess. And again, the students in the 3rd grade, they get tested from kindergarten up through different types of tests, formative tests, summative tests. And they should be, if everyone's doing what we know everyone can do, the goal ultimately is anyway to have it where students get to the 3rd grade and retention is not so much of a problem, because they've been making good use of the resources that have been provided to them in the grades before they get to late in the 3rd grade.
Thank you. I know Dr.
Okay,
Davis.
so yeah, I am not. I don't live in Alabama anymore, but Alabama is in my heart forever. So this is not an original thought, because Jayne and I had the same thought, and she put it in the chat, but I'm going to say it a little differently. Part of the solution around where kids are is to understand the data, and to understand the data, there needs to be policies in place at the state level that will help you to understand the data. One, state identifiers for all children leaving any pre-K experience, be it the state pre-K, Head Start, or child care. Two, that children in the state of Alabama have access and opportunity to quality kindergarten, and it is part of public education, compulsory public education as a right. And so if in fact we want to understand the data and unpack where these kids actually are or what happened to them, the only way you can do that in a real way is that you have the policies in place, so you can understand the data and you have the right and access to the data, because it's aggregated data. You can delineate the data because you have the identifiers and you have the laws that are in place that will give you the ability to access that data. So I know that's I was there when we were trying to decide when kids, the Alabama law Constitution should be changed from when kids used to be farming with their parents of 6 or 7 years old. But yeah, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents in with that. But it's
it sounds like we need to do some advocating for for this, and I think we're all in. I think everyone would agree with that. So we have about 2 minutes here. I do just want to do sort of a round robin, and if you can just say, just in closing, what you're most hopeful for in the coming year. And I will start with you, Kimbrell.
Okay, thank you. I am really hopeful that it won't be back to normal, in that, our students have really been able to be innovative this year. We have seen the littlest ones be able to help their teachers access in ways that we haven't before. I hope that as we go into a new form of education, that we consider learning loss in light of new opportunities, that we are not always reaching back to what we missed, that we use the avenues that we've used to reach students now and parents now, that those continue. I also hope that we haven't just shed light on inequity, but we are actually tackling those inequities and injustices in our educational systems. We know that there is systemic racism, there are systemic disadvantages to our students of color, and also our students who are economically disadvantaged. And I hope that we won't just shed a light on it, but we will actually tackle those really disabling issues, those issues that don't allow our students to grow and move forward as they very, very reasonably can. And so that is my hope for this upcoming school year. I'm not just a principal or president of NESP. I'm a mother as well, mother of an Auburn student as well. So War Eagle. And so my children here in Tennessee and my child who goes to school in Alabama deserve those continued opportunities of diverse ways of addressing learning and also addressing how we move forward in tackling those systematic changes that we need.
I can't believe we went a whole hour without someone.
I didn't say it. I didn't say it the whole time. I held it.
Roll Tide.
All right.
I'm sorry, War Eagle. I was a first year Auburn mom, so I have to take pride in that.
That's awesome. I love it. Dr. Sibley, what are you most hopeful for this year?
Thank you so much. Like Umbrella, I have a daughter in Tennessee, and she's a school teacher in Hamilton County. She's a elementary school teacher there. And my hope is for teachers. I heard kind of secondhand the stress that they went through over the past year. I talked to my daughter almost every afternoon, and I've heard 100 stories about lessons that she's learned. Very often, necessity is the mother of invention, as we know, and some of the things that we had to do because of the COVID crisis turned out to be things that we might continue to do anyway. I heard it mentioned about the virtual PTA meetings and things like that you might realize could come to be of some benefit in the future. So I'm hopeful that we don't let up. I'm hopeful that, as someone said, we don't return to normal. I hope that we use this disruption in educational services to give us an opportunity to say, what else can we do new? We knew that things weren't perfect before COVID. So now that we have the influx of federal resources, and most importantly, a different paradigm in terms of how we think about education and how we move forward, I hope that we take everything that we've gone through in the past year and a half or so, or just a little over a year now or so, and turn it around so that it benefits all children ultimately, but that it helps to, we had gaps before COVID. COVID just exposed them even more. I hope that we use the resources and opportunities available to close that going forward.
Thank you. Jayne, what about you?
Right. So my hope is that after this past year, we all just have a new appreciation for public school. I think we think of the public school system as this kind of massive thing that's just there, and we all just kind of operate around it. But what we saw on that Friday the 13th, and we all remember that day, when at least in Alabama, when our schools shut down, was when the schools shut down, everything shut down. Kids couldn't eat for some of them. Parents couldn't go to work because the kids were at home instead of at school. I just think we all see our role and this business that we're in, this calling for a lot of us, very differently now. My children are still virtual. They're getting out of school next week, but they're still virtual, desperately want to go back to in-person school. And I look forward to sending their little behinds back to in-person school. But they told me just this week, Mommy, we will never complain about going to school ever again, because now they see. And I told those boys, my two boys are fourth grade and seventh grade, I said, it's okay to complain about not wanting to get up because you're sleepy or having to do a project. It's okay to complain about that, but I hope we now see just how important it is to see our teachers and see our buddies and go on field trips. So I want them to now have better perspective about what this life is and why it's important and what it does for all of us. And that's my hope for this entire country, that we now see how foundational the public school system is to everything else in our world.
Absolutely. Dr. Dawson.
Yes, I'm very hopeful that we will continue to innovate so that we can create new learning opportunities for our students by rooting out the deficit mindset, especially for those who have been marginalized, or what I like to call the furthest from justice. I am also hopeful that we will create access for all students to high rigorous and culturally relevant curricula that will advance the whole child. And then finally, I'm hopeful that all children will be able to feel that they can come to a learning environment that is exciting and engaging for them. And to close that out is simply by this, that every student will have a ticket to the party, a seat at the table, and a voice for their own learning. And if we do that, then we will be able to ensure that all of our students are future ready.
You have a lot of nuggets, Dr. Dawson. I'm going to have to
He
go back
does.
and grab all of that. Thank you so much. And I'm going to let my homegirl wrap it up here, Dr. Davis.
I hope that the South realizes that they are the voice of social justice and education for children. I hope that we continue to advocate and speak life into the children and families that we care about. I hope that we tap into how creative we are, how innovative we are, and how change is necessary. I hope that we advocate for children and show up for them in a way that we never thought was possible. And I hope that we continue to learn. And then finally, I hope that we give each other grace and space to just be. And I appreciate you all so much. And I love Alabama and I love the YW. And Dr. Sibley, you tell your gorgeous, beautiful other Dr. Sibley wife, I said hello. I had to throw that in at the end.
I certainly will. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, please take care. Take care, Birmingham Public Schools. Thank you so much and be good to yourselves.
I so appreciate all of you. My goodness, I could talk to you for another hour, but I really have to cut it off here. But thank you so much for participating today. And I think one of the key takeaways for me, at least at the end here, is let's not return to normal, right? We don't want to return to normal. There's a lot we've learned and a lot more that we can do for our children and for our families. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Appreciate you all. Thank you all for a wonderful discussion, and we appreciate it. And our Why We Talk series has come to a close. So check out our ywcabham.org or follow us at YW Central Alabama on social media for details about future Why We Talk episodes. Take care.